Hi, this is International Master David Preuss for Chess.com, and today we are going to look at the greatest game of Wilhelm Steinitz, the first official world chess champion. So you are justifiably excited because this game is going to be off the hook. Steinitz is playing white in this game, and it's a normal Italian game so far. And I'm rushing ahead to a point that matters to me. Now, in this position here, white has taken over the center by playing c3 and then d4. And it is a very good idea for black to try and strike back somehow against white in the center. In particular on these two squares I've highlighted, because his bishop pinning the knight means that black has a good chance to gain control of those two squares. So one way to strike back would be to push d5, and another way would be to capture the pawn. Which one do you think is correct? What this goes to show is that you really have to do a little calculation to know what's best. You can't simply follow principles. Principles will help narrow down your choice of moves to 2 moves, in this case, in some cases 3 moves. Sometimes principles will narrow your moves down to 1. But here there's no simple way to know whether or not you should counter with your pawn, developing your bishop, or if you should try and just grab white's central pawn. It turns out the better move is to grab white's central pawn, and this game here will go a long way to explaining why. So after d5, white takes, black recaptures, and now white castles. Now, there's a threat on black's knight now that white's knight can move. So black has to deal with that. And one way would be to now win a pawn on c3. But if black now goes and wins this pawn on c3, he finds himself quite a bit behind in development. So let's say he captures. White has a number of attractive options here. One would be the move bishop a3, trying to prevent castling. Another would be the move queen to b3, attacking the bishop, and bishop takes f7 check. And another is just bishop takes f7 check right away, winning back the pawn. So you can see here that black would be in trouble. Probably black's best option in this position would be to take once on c3 to remove the pressure, but now there's no threat to his bishop. And now in this position, black can simply castle. And black has, fair chances in the game, but it's still somewhat an advantage for white. So let me show you what happens in the game. In the game, black continues developing with bishop to e6. And he hopes to hold on to this strong point on d5. However, after this strong move from Steinitz, trying to develop with a gain of tempo, well, and successfully doing so, since f6 is not a good move for black after rook to e1. So after Steinitz develops with a free tempo, and von Bardeleben blocks with bishop e7, in this position, Steinitz does a very important short calculation and manages to prevent black from castling, which, as you've seen in some other videos, is an important thing to be able to do. So see if you can figure out for yourself how white can prevent black from castling here. Pause the video at any point if you need to, and let's continue. White needs to trade off this knight on d5 that can recapture on e7. So he takes on d5. The goal is to leave black with no good way to block the e-file, right? And to play rook to e1. So first he trades the knight, black takes back. Now he trades yet again, in fact, and trades again, and puts his rook on the open file. And by trading off all those pieces, he's left black with an insufficiently defended knight so that black can't castle kingside. Now, black realizes that they can't castle kingside. For example, if they bring their queen back, white can always just pile on with the queen, and black still won't be able to castle. So realizing that they can't castle, black uses one of the techniques that we've seen before, which is to play the move f6 in order to be able to sort of castle by hand, moving the king while he still defends the knight, and then bringing the rook into the game. Now, we've seen some simple examples of how to exploit the attack on the open file, but this is our more advanced and exciting example. So black blocks with the queen, and here white doesn't have a simple way to just gang up on this knight more times than black can defend. The way to try and do something like that would be, knight h4, king here, knight f5, but the white knight doesn't get there in time. The black king is already moved and black can take it. So here Steinitz comes up with an absolutely amazing way to get his other rook into the game, as well as to use the knight and to create lots of pressure on black. So this move here, this next move, is just an incredibly excellent strategic move, showing a very, very good understanding already of dynamic play. He brings his rook out onto this open file. Now, black is going to play c6, which is a typical way to break the influence of a file, right, to set up a pawn defended by a pawn on that file. The reason, by the way, that this file's pressure matters is black can't play king f7, continuing his plan, because of queen c4 check. And then white is going to have this c7 pawn hanging here. So black played c6, and now Steinitz's follow-up is just beautiful. He is going to sacrifice this pawn in order to open up the c file as well for this rook. So black takes it, and now he plays knight d4. And you can see that now his rook and knight are in great position. And his idea is going to be to bring the knight to e6, and from there the knight will help him create threats before black's fully able to coordinate the rooks, even though black is well on his way to doing so with king f7, right? Connecting the rooks, he's a step or two away from really challenging the white rooks. And now the knight comes to e6, as we'd expected. And here's a good place to stop for a moment and think, how can black untangle in the face of this knight on e6? Is it actually preventing him? So one thing that black would like to do would be to counter the e file, right, and defend this knight more. But then white has the move knight c7, which is a problem, right? So that's the first simple example of how the knight on e6 restricts black's options. So the second thing that black could do is to try and challenge the c file first instead. And black is going to choose to do that with rook h to c8 in the game. But we could just look at rook a to c8 for a moment if you like. And here's one potential issue with that move. White could play queen g4, threatening check on g7, which is a serious threat, and threatening knight g5 check to try and win the queen. So if black plays g6, white will play knight g5 check, the king moves to defend the queen, and now there's an X-ray attack. The white queen is looking through the black queen at c8, and white wins with rook takes c8 check. Or black could have tried rook takes rook, trying to deflect the white rook from defending the knight on e6. And now one easy way for white to win would be to take this pawn with check. King comes here, take this rook with check. King comes here, check here as well. King comes here, and then capture this rook at the end. Just one example of how white could win. So let's go back and see the actual course of the game. Black plays rook h to c8, which certainly is the best looking option for black. Okay, and that's because we see that white's going to try and make some kind of threat on g4 or h5 before black's finished untangling. And now the black king can safely drop back without blocking the connection of his rooks. Right, so rook h c8 looks like the best defensive move to keep those rooks connected and defending each other. But Steinitz had already seen or found at this point, I don't know for sure, a really, really amazing and long combination, starting with queen g4 threatening g7. So you notice that white has to play with a lot of threats here, because if they don't, black's going to trade off a rook and then bring the other rook out to c8. And as he trades off one or two of these white pieces, white's not going to have much of an attack, and the black king is not that exposed anymore, right? He's pretty close to his proper home. So white has to play very precisely and aggressively with constant threats here to make anything of his lead. So here, black can't take on c1 because white will in fact checkmate black in two moves, as seen. So after queen g4, black's going to play g6 to keep the white queen out of g7. That's his only defense there. And now Steinitz continues the tactics with knight g5 check, opening up the hidden attack between his queen and the black queen. So the black king is in check and his queen is attacked. The only move to save both is to defend the queen with the king. And in this position, Steinitz starts an absolutely phenomenal combination, which is typical in a sense of the strategy of using open files against a king, but certainly a very complicated example nonetheless. Pause your videos, try and figure out what white does next here if you want an opportunity to yourself find one of the most brilliant combinations of all time. All right, well, it occurs to me that one possible good move for white, which Steinitz didn't play, would actually be knight takes h7, with the idea that after queen takes queen, white will play knight takes f6 check, and then recapture on g4 with a two-pawn up endgame. So if that's the move you were thinking of, I have no real complaint with that move. That looks like a perfectly good move to me. But the move which Steinitz played is even better, honestly, and it is a super complicated tactic, sacrificing the rook here on e7, trying to deflect the black pieces from each other. So, for example, simplest, if the queen takes, then the queen is no longer defending c8, and the white queen is still attacking it through this diagonal, and rook takes c8 check leaves white ahead by a knight. A more complicated variation would be for black to take the rook with his king, defending his queen still. Now white's not going to be able to win over here, but white will be able to win by continuing his attack on this open file by switching his rook over here to e1 check. If the king comes to d6, white will checkmate with queen b4 check, hurting the king, and for example, king to c6, rook c1 mate, or king to c7, and now white could win the queen with rook to e7, or play knight e6 check, king here, queen check, rook blocks, knight takes rook, and if queen recaptures, white has back rank mate. Lots of variations to calculate to justify this play. Another possible move from black is king to d8, and here one simple win for white would just be knight e6 check, cutting off his escape square while checking him. That should force black to either trade his queen for the knight, which is not going to prolong this game very much, or he could resist for one extra move by moving his king, and then knight c5 check from the rook and attacking the queen. You can see that white is going to win. So the rook comes into e7, capturing, and is untouchable. However, Steinitz had to see further than these two black recaptures not working. Black actually has an incredible defense here, king to f8. And the point of the king f8 defense is that white is weak to a back rank checkmate. So if you capture the queen, either way, black will take on c1 and checkmate white. But Steinitz had seen that he could win the game here, and he had calculated the further move rook f7 check, defended by the knight, and if the queen takes, the same thing happens as before with rook takes c8, leaving white ahead a knight. So the black king moves, and now, and if you want to pause and try and guess any of these moves, you are welcome to. If you guess even one of these, that will be certainly something you could be happy about. And now Steinitz continues his tactics with the move rook to g7 check. Now it turns out even without the knight defending him, the rook is immune to the king on the 7th rank, because then white can take the queen with check and black doesn't have time to back rank mate white. Just really unfortunate for black. So at this point, von Bardeleben finally saw the full extent of Steinitz's combination, and revealing how good chess players had become in the 30 years since Morphy, He saw all the way to the end of this and realized he had lost the game and got up from the board and slipped out of the tournament hall and left. Nowadays, that wouldn't be considered good form, but who knows what the rules of sportsmanship were back then. Steinitz was a little bit disappointed that the guy left, but still pretty happy about the game he'd just played. Steinitz was, I would say, a happy guy who really enjoyed his chess. So Steinitz called the crowd together of people who were watching this game and explained to them how he was going to win the game, which I will now do for you in case any of you can't see 8 or 10 moves ahead. So here's how it would end. Let's say black plays his king over this way. Now white can play knight takes h7 check, still trying to force the king to take, so white can take this queen with check. And if the king comes this way, well, this is check anyway now. So the main line would run king to h8, and now he would take on h7 check again. Still no queen can take the rook because of rook takes c8 with a winning endgame for white. So the black king moves, or has to move, to g8 at this point. And now rook g7 check a second time. So still black can't take it with the king because of queen d7, and can't take it with the queen because of rook c8. So black has to come back to h8. Now white forces black to capture the rook by checking with the queen. King has to take it. Check. Here. Check. Here. Check. And if the king comes up to d6, this is checkmate in 1. So the king should come back to d8, for example, and now you can finish him off with check, here, check, here, check, here, mate. Okay, so I know that basically this game was a huge ton and mass of variations, which is not the easiest thing to learn from, but one of the things you need to know and learn about chess is that chess is often about really, really long combinations and calculations. And sometimes it's beautiful just to be able to see an incredibly long sequence of correct moves. And Steinitz, 15 moves before this position here, 15 moves before this checkmate, he plays queen g4, initiating this combination of g6, knight g5 check. And it's one of the more phenomenal combinations that I've ever seen. And I also think that this game has value because it really shows us an advanced example of, taking advantage of files, and this d5 pawn sacrifice, which he had to be planning when he played rook c1, right? Planning this d5 pawn sack followed by bringing the knight to d4 and to e6 is a very, very nice show of how chess strategy works to then set up attacks and tactics. So there's a lot to learn from this game, and it's very complicated, so I urge you all to play through the game on a chessboard yourself, play over it a couple times, look at some of the variations for yourself, check with my comments, and enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around on chess.com.